Welcome to this Academic Explainer. Today, we're diving into a full lecture on Tema 24 for the Opposition is AOI Argonne. We'll be looking closely at mode, means, and instrument. Now, if you're a C2 candidate or gearing up to be a language teacher, you already know that mastering this topic isn't just about memorizing a list of prepositions, right? It's really about uncovering the deep semantic structures of English. We're going to explore how prepositions act as these incredibly versatile tools that build complex relationships inside a clause, taking your skills from advanced straight to native-like mastery. So here's our roadmap for today. First, the nature of prepositional phrases. Second, expressing manner. Third, conveying means and instrument. Fourth, semantic roles of agency. And finally, some conclusions for C2 mastery. Let's get right into it. Starting off with Section 1, the nature of prepositional phrases, looking specifically at their syntactic functions and defining features. Now, while prepositional phrases can absolutely modify nouns or act as verb complements, it's their adverbial function that's the absolute most critical when we're talking about mode, means, and instrument. If we look at Quirk's framework of adverbial integration, we can actually categorize these phrases by how deeply they embed themselves into the clause structure. Take an adjunct, for example. It is fully integrated into the core syntax, like saying on the bus. It's essential to the immediate meaning. But prepositions can also operate on a higher, more peripheral level to evaluate or connect clauses. A subjunct gives a specific, kind of subordinate point of view, like from a personal point of view. Then you have a disjunct, which acts as a sort of metalinguistic commentary. It shows the speaker's overall evaluation, like saying, in all fairness. And finally, a conjunct serves a logical, connective function between different units of discourse. Think of phrases like, on the other hand. Getting a solid grip on these levels of integration is literally the foundation for advanced syntax analysis. Okay, to truly master these expressions, we need to isolate what we call central prepositions. English is, relatively impoverished when it comes to morphology. Our prepositions don't change their spelling or form based on case or gender, so linguists actually have to define them syntactically. And they do this negatively, meaning we define them by the complements they absolutely reject. A central preposition literally cannot be followed by a that clause, an infinitive clause, or a subjective pronoun. For instance, as a C2 speaker, you know to say, he was surprised at her attitude, right? You intuitively know it's completely ungrammatical to say, he was surprised that she noticed him. The syntax just outright rejects it. To fix that, you either have to drop the preposition entirely or build a lexical bridge, like adding the phrase the fact, giving you surprised at the fact that she noticed him. A lot of the architecture for this analysis comes straight from the seminal 1985 text, A Comprehensive Grammar of the English Language by Quirk, Greenbaum, Leach, and Spartvic. They're the ones who really established prepositions as a closed-class lexical category, but their real game-changer for advanced linguistics is this concept of gradients. Gradients is all about the fluid, permeable boundaries between lexical classes. Words like after or before don't just exist in a vacuum. They seamlessly slide across a gradient, acting as prepositions in one context and subordinating conjunctions in another. And it is dictated 100% by the syntax that follows them. Moving on to Section 2, expressing manner in English, which is all about describing exactly how an action is performed. When we want to express manner, English relies heavily on these very formulaic, structurally fixed phrases. You'll constantly see constructions using in a manner or in a way, like the job was done in a workmanlike manner. But equally important is the preposition with, paired up with an abstract noun. For example, we were received with the utmost courtesy. In this case, with is giving us the spirit, the emotional vibe, or the qualitative method behind what happened. It's actually pretty fascinating from a morphological standpoint. A phrase like with courtesy can easily commute into the adverb courteously. But as C2 candidates, you really need to recognize that while they're grammatically parallel, prepositional structures usually carry way more stylistic weight and rhythmic gravitas when you're writing formally. Now, this brings us to a crucial minimal pair that always tests advanced learners, the semantic difference between like and as. Mixing these up isn't just a tiny grammatical slip, it completely breaks down the pragmatic meaning of your message. If we say, life is like a dream, we're using like as a comparative preposition for pure resemblance. But think about the impact in a professional setting. If you say, she spoke like a lawyer, the semantics imply she just has the mannerisms of a lawyer. On the flip side, she spoke as a lawyer, uses as an appositive marker of true identity. It denotes her actual role or capacity. In that context, she inherently is the lawyer. Nailing this distinction is absolutely paramount for precise communication. And that leads us to section 3. Conveying means and instrument, basically answering the question, how? So, by is our go-to preposition for means, but its usage is tied up with something linguists call lexical aspect or actions art. Let's look at the difference between I go to work by bus and I go to work on the bus. I go to work by bus is describing your general, habitual way of traveling. But the second you swap by for on, you change the lexical aspect entirely. On creates a state of condition. It emphasizes this specific, progressive state of actively being in transit. And because that in-transit state focuses on a temporary, ongoing moment, it actually clashes with the iterative, habitual nature of the verb phrase going to work. This little aspectual conflict is exactly why by bus sounds natural and correct to a native ear when talking about generalized habits. We also use by for means of communication, like by letter or by post, and for paths or methods, like entering by the back door. There is a very strict syntactic rule to keep in mind here, the zero article rule. When by introduces a means using a singular, unmodified count noun, you absolutely do not use a determiner. It's always by bus, never by the bus. The linguistic reasoning here is that when you strip the noun of its article, you strip away its referential physical identity. It turns the physical object, the bus, the letter, into an abstract concept of transmission. The absolute second you add a modifier, like by the last bus, it reverts right back to a concrete physical entity, and the determiner becomes mandatory. Now, if by gives us the conceptual method, with gives us the specific physical tool. In thematic relations, with assigns the instrumental role. Take the sentence, someone had broken the window with a stone. An instrument inherently implies an agent. Even if the agent isn't mentioned in the surface syntax, the very concept of an instrument demands that an unseen hand is holding it. Functionally and semantically, this is identical to saying someone used a stone to break the window. And naturally, the syntactic negative of this instrumental with is without, which establishes the absence of the tool, as in, I drew it without a ruler. Next up is section 4, semantic roles of agency, focusing on instruments and adjectives in the passive voice. Let's look at a scenario that really brings this to life, showing how a little linguistic ambiguity can completely alter real-world situations, like writing a police report or filing an insurance claim. Picture this. There's a tree outside your house during a massive storm, and your car gets damaged. If you're describing this in the passive voice, would you say the car was damaged by the branch or damaged with the branch? Well, the answer lies in the linguistic theory of theta roles, or thematic roles. If you say, my car was damaged by the branch, the syntax is assigning the branch the role of an agent, specifically an inanimate force of nature. It means the storm itself blew the branch onto your vehicle. But if you say, my car was damaged with the branch, you're forcing the branch into the theta role of an instrument. And like we just established, an instrument requires a user. So with strongly implies that a human agent actively picked up that branch and smashed your car. Just changing one preposition shifts the entire legal reality of the scene from an unavoidable act of nature into a deliberate act of vandalism. Syntacticians actually use a formal diagnostic test to prove that by and with assign these completely different deep structure thematic roles. It's called the coordination restriction. Check out this phrase. He was killed by a man and an arrow. That asterisk means the structure is grammatically forbidden. English syntax absolutely will not let you coordinate an agent, the man, and an instrument, the arrow, under the exact same prepositional phrase. Because they don't share the same deep structure thematic role, you simply cannot conjoin them syntactically. The diagnostic forces us to separate them. He was killed by a man with an arrow. It's pretty amazing because the structural syntax perfectly maps out the underlying semantics. Which brings us to our final part, section 5. Conclusions for C2 Mastery, focusing on precision in formal and academic discourse. When you're standing in front of the opposition's tribunal, you have to show native-like semantic precision, and that means having absolute command over these micro-distinctions. True linguistic competence isn't just memorizing vocabulary. It's mastering the syntactic negative definitions of central prepositions. It means flawlessly navigating the pragmatic lines between the resemblance of like and the identity of as. You need to intuitively grasp how lexical aspect creates transit states, separating on the bus from the non-referential habitual by bus. And fundamentally, you have to be able to completely separate the agent of by from the instrumental with so you can assign the accurate thematic roles in passive constructions. The level of academic rigor we've gone through today is firmly rooted in the works of two brilliant but distinct linguistic giants. On one side, we have Halliday's systemic functional linguistics, which looks deeply at how the meaning and social function of manner dictate the structural choices we make. On the flip side, we have the massive 1999 Longman Grammar of Spoken and Written English by Biber and his colleagues. Biber's corpus-based approach goes way beyond theoretical function to actually prove, using huge data sets, exactly how often and how strictly these prepositional structures pop up in high-level academic writing. Embracing both Halliday's functional theory and Biber's hard empirical data is the true hallmark of C2 mastery. Ultimately, prepositions aren't just the morphological glue that holds a sentence together. They are the semantic directors of the action. They assign roles, define states, and frame reality. As future educators in the EY system, you've got a twofold challenge. You need to master these deep structural narratives for your own success, absolutely. But you also need to understand their mechanics so profoundly that you can unpack them for your future students. So I'll leave you with this. Will you merely use prepositions to connect words, or will you use them to truly command the narrative of your sentence? Keep analyzing the underlying syntax and let that knowledge empower your teaching.